What does it all mean?
This is where the archaeology has been found.
Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, look at that.
I need a planter.
A shrine to a belly button.
This is a rock salt? Look at that. No one gets into this place.
No one. Nice. Whoa, don't take me too far.
Now that's naked archaeology.
Every year, there's a best-selling book about a secret cult preserving some original and pure form of Christianity. These stories of ancient bloodlines and underground sects are purely works of fiction, or are they? As it turns out, there was an original movement that may have gone underground for centuries and beyond. I'm on a search for the original Jesus movement, the Judeo-Christians, or as I like to call them, the JC Bunch. The earliest followers of Jesus were Jews.
That's a Jewish star. Is it Jewish?
They gave props to Moses and all his laws, ate kosher chow, circumcised, and made Saturday a day to chill out.
You have some strange customs, you Israelites.
They sang exactly the same tune as traditional Jews, except for one note. They believed Jesus was the Messiah,
a savior for all men.
the prophet who would reunite the Jewish tribes and liberate Judea from the Romans. After the crucifixion of Jesus, his brother James led the entire movement. That is, until he had a little run-in with the Apostle Paul. Paul took the original Judeo-Christian message and removed 613 commandments to present what he believed was a more accessible reflection of the faith.
That is the mirror that I approve of.
Paul changed the Jesus movement from a Jewish sect into one of the most popular religions around, Christianity. But what happened to the original Jewish Jesus movement? Most scholars say that by the time Christianity was made legal in the 4th century, the original Jesus following had dissolved. But I don't think that's what happened. I think the Jesus movement went underground.
Now listen, this is what we do. We take 2 cars. We drive south all night and all day.
I think they continued with their beliefs and traditions well into the 5th and 6th centuries, maybe even further than most scholars have ever imagined. And in this episode, I'll try to prove it. I'm going to start by going to the source, Jesus' hometown of Capernaum.
This is Capernaum. It lasted from about 150 BCE to 750 CE or AD. For about 900 years, it was a beautiful village. And why is this so important? Because the Gospels say this is where Jesus hung out. You know, the Gospel of Matthew says this was his home. Jesus may have preached in that synagogue. Well, not exactly the white synagogue, maybe in the synagogue that stood on that black foundation before this white synagogue. Here is also where he recruited some of his apostles, some of the most famous ones, like the 2 brothers, the sons of Zebedee.
Hello, all you people out there in Gameland. Today we're going to play an exciting new game called
Who are the Sons of Zebedee?
You gotta find a Christian who knows about the sons of Zebedee. Is there a Christian in the house? Who are the sons of Zebedee in the New Testament? The sons of Zebedee. He only speaks Polish. Excuse me, Father, you know what? I forgot. This is a crazy question. Who are the sons of Zebedee?
Unde este biserica?
Vorbești românește, putem să vorbim românește.
Vorbești, întrebați pe
A Romanian. One of my many talents. Fia lui Zebedee, the sons of Zebedee.
Ioan Botezătorul?
Sunt 2.
Ioan și Iacob.
Iohanan și Iacovi și James.
Sunt frați.
These are both priests. They've cleared it up. 2 of the apostles, James and John, are the sons of Zebedee. Eu sunt evreu, ca toți oamenii care au trăit aici.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
The sons of Zebedee, James, John, the son of Zebedee, and they were partners, according to the Gospels, in the fishing business with Simon Peter. And there's another apostle, James, the son of Alphaeus. And these names, Zebedee, Alphaeus, they're not that common. And yet, right here in Capernaum, what we have right behind me, right over there, are these names literally carved in stone.
Alphaeus, the son of Zebediah, the son of John, made this column.
may it be for him a blessing. This stone column is from this 5th century synagogue, built at a time when most scholars believed the Judeo-Christians had disappeared, even from here in Capernaum, their original hood. But if the rare names inscribed on this stone are unique to the JC tribe, it would mean that the descendants of the very first Judeo-Christians were living here well into the 5th century. I asked archaeologist Moti Aviam to tell me about the pillar.
So somebody made a donation to the synagogue.
And his name was written on the pillar. He probably gave the money for this pillar or for a group of pillars.
But here's the thing. What you have here is John, Zebedee, Alphaeus, all connected to this area in the Gospels.
Could be even relatives of the original people that we talked about here. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this stone from this synagogue is connected to the Jewish Christians. Okay?
It's strong circumstantial evidence. Because at the very least, you have these names associated with this place in the Gospels. They're rare names. You have them on a column in a synagogue in the same place. Knowing how villages work, it's probably the same clan that had the names you keep getting called after the grandfather and so on. If it is the same clan, or the apostles of Jesus, odds are they believe that he is the guy.
That's a hypothesis that I will not buy immediately.
Moti thinks I'm stretching the evidence over the centuries and well into a time when he believes there were no Judeo-Christians in Capernaum, especially not donating columns to synagogues. He says that by the 5th century, the JC bunch had been pushed out.
They were inside Jewish community. Towards the end of this period, toward the 2nd, 3rd century, Jews pushed them out. There was a great split between the Jewish Christian and the Jews. And then, when Christianity became what it is, when they took over, they also pushed the early Christians outside. They didn't want them because they were Jews.
The Jews didn't want them because they were Christians, and Christians didn't want them because they were Jews.
Exactly.
By the 5th century, Christianity had been legal for 100 years, and it had evolved. Thanks to the Apostle Paul, the belief in Jewish laws like circumcision and eating kosher were replaced solely by a belief in Jesus. And Christians now worship Jesus as divine. On the flip side, the Judeo-Christians followed all the Jewish laws, and they believed Jesus was a mortal prophet, a Messiah, but not a God. So they would have found the new church a strange place to worship.
How do you get any kicks in a place like this?
Kicks? Oh, I've found diversion.
But why couldn't the Judeo-Christians go on honoring Jewish law alongside traditional Jews in synagogues like this one? Where's the evidence of the clear-cut split Moti is talking about between Jew and Judeo-Christian? Would you believe a couple of rabbis put it down on paper 1,800 years ago, and it just may have driven the Judeo-Christians underground? I just may have the proof that by the 3rd century, Judeo-Christians were not a tiny sect inside Judaism, but a force to be reckoned with. Professor Isaiah Gaffney tells me that 1,800 years ago, the rabbis took them so seriously that they changed Jewish liturgy to get the Judeo-Christians out of the synagogues.
You have prayers that are introduced into the synagogue liturgy that seem to be castigating others. And the phrase that appears in rabbinic literature is minim, and nobody really knows what that word min means, but it seems to relate to an otherness. In other words, somebody who is different, who has embraced some sort of problematic belief.
But these are Jews.
These are definitely Jews. And in fact, one of the benedictions that was inserted into the liturgy, it's really a curse of the minim, says that they should have no hope unless they return to the Torah.
When the rabbis were codifying Jewish liturgy, they warned readers of the heretical minim, the others. They even introduced a curse against the minim that was to be recited with a loud voice in the synagogue. May the Nazarenes and the minim perish in an instant. May they all be erased from the book of life, that they may not be counted among the righteous.
what they're doing is they're cursing others. And I'm sure that a lot of people said, well, I'm not an other, I'm a mainstream Jew. In fact, I'm a super mainstream Jew. I even believe in the Messiah, right? So again, it's hard to know who was really being singled out in the original version of this text.
The Jesus movement are a good candidate, aren't they?
I think so, yes. I think Christian Jews, or Judeo-Christians, however we want to call them, would have been one of those others.
What set the JC bunch apart from traditional Jews was their belief in Jesus as the Messiah.
A Messiah? Who is he?
And what made their belief in Jesus difficult among Jews was the simultaneous worship coming from Pauline Christians. It was the Apostle Paul's version of the faith that had become the new Christianity.
It's like I'm an inventor.
And Paul's followers were emphasizing the supernatural qualities of Jesus, the divinity. For Jews, the Messiah was supposed to be a mortal prophet, not a divine God. And because the JC bunch chose Jesus as their Messiah, the Judeo-Christians were now perceived by the rabbis as confusing traditional Jewish faith, and so they were called minim, the others, and bounced from the synagogue.
They seem trapped between a rock and a hard place.
They are between a rock and a hard place because obviously Gentile Christians are going to suspect them of backsliding and of not really and you read this in Christian literature, they are constantly suspect. Obviously, rabbis are pushing them out, and they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And by the 4th century, they seem to be already a museum piece.
And that's how most scholars believe the JC bunch disappeared. But what if they went underground? There just might be evidence that some synagogues were minim-friendly for hundreds of years following the crucifixion. I've heard of some strange mosaics that may point to an ancient hideout.
Look at that.
He's a tall man. He's a tall man.
This is Tiberias, the ancient center of Jewish culture beginning in the 2nd century. There is evidence here that suggests an underground brotherhood, a Jewish-Christian combo, and a Jewish-Christian hideout.
I'm in a 1,700-year-old synagogue, but there's something very weird about this synagogue which has mystified scholars from the time that it was found. There are pagan symbols in here. What are the Jews doing, bringing idolatrous images into the synagogue?
This ancient mosaic is a mixture of traditional Jewish icons, pagan idols, and what just might be early Christian symbols. Directly underneath the menorah and Jerusalem's holy temple are the signs of the zodiac. And in the center of the wheel is a depiction of Helios, the Greek sun god.
Look at that.
That some say was adopted by the Romans as Sol Invictus.
The sun god, which becomes Sol Invictus for the Romans, which becomes Jesus resurrected. You have to understand, this symbol, the double halo, became a symbol synonymous with Jesus, not the emperor, not Sol Invictus.
Sol Invictus was often depicted with the sun's rays shooting from his crown, and Roman emperors wore similar crowns. Christian iconography adopted some of the artistic language of paganism, and Sol Invictus was changed to depict Christ with a halo.
And what you have here is the rays coming out of his head, but he's also got the symbol of Jesus. In fact, Roman emperors did not wear that crown once they became Christian because it was identified with Jesus. This is a Christian symbol, and they encoded it because at the time that they built this house of worship, Christianity was still illegal. So the Roman soldiers outside could come in here, look at this and say, oh, we know those images, Zodiac, Sol Invictus, they're worshiping the emperor, that's wonderful, and they leave. Except you've put in a Christian halo. What you've essentially said is that I'm not worshiping the pagan god, I'm worshiping Jesus. And look over here, we've got an uncircumcised naked boy in a synagogue. What's he doing here? Remember, it was Paul that says you don't have to circumcise anymore. No kosher synagogue would put an image of a naked boy, uncircumcised on top of that, in the synagogue. Unless they're not exactly kosher Jews. Unless we're literally standing in the middle of an encoded early Christian mosaic, Judeo-Christians.
This mosaic contains all kinds of contradictions, but perhaps it's reflecting a specific moment in history. Is it possible that here we have a snapshot of a transition from Jewish to Judeo-Christian to Christian? Is this an early Christian synagogue?
How come they wrote all the signs of the zodiac properly, except Aquarius representing water, next to the fish? Only those two signs have been tampered with. Now you can say, well, you're imagining things. You think this is Judeo-Christian. This is really just a mosaic. It's really a pagan symbol, except it's written in Hebrew. The word for Aquarius is dli, for vessel. And what you have here is 3 letters, Dalet, Lamed, Yud in Hebrew, except they flipped the Hebrew letters so that the only way to read it is with a mirror. Are they telling us there's a code here?
Before the Last Supper, Jesus told his disciples, "A man will meet you carrying an earthen pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he goes." And so Aquarius was important for the early Christians, the carrier of holy water to be followed into the house of God.
How come only one letter in the sign of the fish, a traditional and early Judeo-Christian symbol, is flipped to create a symbol? Instead of the letter Gimel or G, suddenly you have a symbol.
By flipping the G, the ancient artists draw attention to a chevron right next to the fish. Perhaps it's a coded message for an underground movement.
Are they telling us there's a code here? Flip everything. You think it's pagan, it's not.
The Jewish Christian images here are exciting because they may reflect the beliefs of an original Jesus following. And it's got me thinking that other ancient synagogues may have been hideouts for the early Christian movement. I wanted to test out my theory on archaeologist Moti Aviam. He took me to the ruins of another 4th century synagogue in Horazin. And it didn't take long to discover something a little fishy.
What do you call this?
This is the tip of the gable.
Gable that used to be up there, right? And look at it. I mean, this is fine workmanship. But right over here, can you see it? The fish is known as an early Christian symbol.
It's a fish. And there is an eagle, and there are lions, and there are figurative decorations.
Just a decoration.
Just a decoration.
I just have a very fishy idea. You have in Tiberias that funny zodiac right under the temple in a synagogue. And you have the fish, the symbols of the fish.
Mm-hmm.
And smack dab, the gimel, is inversed in the middle of the gim.
Yeah, so?
I think scholars are playing too casually with the potential symbology of these signs. People generally don't do everything for decorative reasons, especially not in the places where they pray. So
no, I don't agree. Completely disagree with you.
Okay,
Moti wasn't buying my theory on fish and gables, but he did tell me of an ancient village not far from here in the Golan, where an archaeologist claims to have discovered exactly the kind of evidence I'm looking for.
He's a tall, tall man. He's a tall, tall man.
Here we are in Farj. Farj is in the Golan Heights. It's a modern Syrian Arab village, and it's built on the ruins of Byzantine, a 1,500-year-old Christian village. And right now, we're looking for Jews, Christians, and something in between.
A controversial discovery was made here in the early 1980s.
There is a cross in a circle.
The archaeologist Claudine Dauphin recorded mysterious symbols carved in the stone lintels of these houses that she believed unveiled a Judeo-Christian presence in a city that most scholars believe was Christian only.
Look at this thing, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Menorahs with crosses in them.
Let's try and look for
Find it.
Yeah.
I think that's in the picture of the article, Dauphin's article. Look at that.
That's a beautiful building here, beautiful building.
Do you need a flashlight? I don't see any Judeo-Christians.
I don't think that Jews and Christians lived here together in the Byzantine period. And in my view, the Byzantine period, this was a Christian village, and only a Christian village.
Look at this. See this?
That's something. Yeah.
an oval with a tree of life, like you say, on its side. Far be it from me to jump to any assumptions, but it's exactly where Jews put their mezuzahs, in exactly the same position on an angle.
Yeah, so what?
Tell me this, tree of life is Christian?
Tree of life exists in many cultures, also in Judaism and Christianity.
Okay, so this could be a Jewish symbol.
Yes.
And it's not on top, but
it's on the door jamb.
It's on the door jamb. So I'm in a quote-unquote Christian village, and I see a symbol that you say is Judeo or Christian in a context that is suggestive to me of Judeo-Christianity. They seem to be using a Christian Jewish symbol, if you will, in a new way, but in an old way.
According to the crosses found in this village, I would assume this is a Christian village, and this tree of life could be some kind of a Christian symbol, but it also could be a Samaritan house, or someone that is carrying some kind of an earlier Jewish traditions, but it's not a proof itself. It's not a proof. It's not enough to declare Farage as a Jewish Christian village.
Look at this. What I will say is this. It's very suggestive. If you were moving from Judaism to Christianity, you stopped using a mezuzah. You stopped using overtly Judaic Orthodox symbols, but you want your house to be blessed. It makes sense that you would put it on your door jamb to bring
luck.
To bring luck, blessing on your house.
Support from heaven.
You don't have a mezuzah?
Yeah.
You put a tree of life.
It could happen, yeah.
If it could happen, maybe it did happen. And this village is one of the last bastions of the Judeo-Christians still around some 300 years after most scholars say they disappeared. But perhaps what we're seeing is how the Judeo-Christians became invisible, continuing as a heresy, chiseling codes and symbols and passing their message forward through the centuries, maybe as far as Leonardo da Vinci and beyond.
He's a total